Hi, and welcome to Stamp with Ginny. Today I'm going to share with you how I decorated this fun It Starts with Art WIPER card. So let me set this aside and I'll show you how I got started. Okay, we have our WIPER card base built, and you can see how I did this in my WIPER card part 1 It Starts with Art tutorial video. So let's get started decorating. I am going to build the card front on this piece of designer series paper before I put it on the front of my card here, because it'll allow me to trim things. So I'm going to take the second piece of It Starts with Art designer series paper, and I am going to add some adhesive to the center here. And I am going to lay this at an angle, and I'm going to take the point of the paper and set it on the right and the left edge so that it's lined up. And then I'm going to take my scissors and simply trim those extra little pieces off. Okay, and that gives me this little diagonal stripe. And then I'm going to take this piece of vellum and I'm simply going to eyeball some angles onto it. And I want them going the same way for this particular project, but you can decide how you would like to do it. And then I'm going to take my snail adhesive and adhere this. Now I like to use a dry adhesive, either snail or glue dots for this, only because vellum tends to buckle when you're using a wet adhesive, and so you want to place that adhesive where it's not going to be seen. Okay, now that I have my vellum attached, I am going to start building my focal point. I have stamped my spool image onto Whisper White, and I wanted to show you quickly how I did this. If you notice, my spool of ribbons have two different colors on them to kind of show different texture to the ribbon. So what I did was simply take my dark Calypso Coral and run it around the ribbon where I wanted it, just to give it a little more texture. And then I took my light and I actually just finished coloring. And I'm using the Calypso Coral because I thought it went nice with the ribbon heart. And of course it coordinates with the paper. And once I've got that colored in, then I can start blending to make that flow a little bit better and smoother, but still gives me that shading that I was looking for, kind of like a two-tone ribbon. And I did that both on the Calypso Coral here. And oops, I'm doing this quick, so I'm not being as good at staying in the lines. Great thing that we have a color lifter, and of course I can switch to my bullet point, which will make me a little more accurate here since I'm moving quickly. There we go. And I repeated that for the pool party. And of course, you know, with our blends, if you are worried about damaging the tip of your marker, you can lay them on your table and simply guide the tip into the cap so that you're not making any errors as you're closing them, and that protects the tip a little better. Okay, there we go. I've got the ribbon, and so I'm ready to cut that out with my die. So let me bring back in the items that I've done. Okay, I've die cut the pieces that I need, and I've used the Calypso Coral for the ribbon, and I've used my color lifter and fixed those little places where I went out of the line along with the die to cut out the ribbon spool. I did a button here in the Pacific Point, and I stamped the ink refill bottle using my Tuxedo Black and then colored it in with my Calypso Coral markers also. I'm going to start with my sentiment. I'm going to take my Pacific Point and I'm going to ink up the Follow Your Art sentiment and simply stamp that on my cardstock. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is take my little spool here and I'm going to lightly ink that up with my Calypso Coral and stamp. And then I'm going to bring in my sentiment, You Make Everything Sparkle, ink that up with the Pacific Point, down and up, and put that in the center of it. And then I'm going to bring in my 1.5 inch circle punch, and this time I'm just going to punch out the top of this. So voila. And then I'm going to take my ink and I'm going to add this little ink bottle here on the one side. and the button over here with my multi-purpose adhesive. I think I said ink earlier. You know I did that wrong. And I'm going to allow that to dry. While that's drying, I'm going to take my Follow My Art and my scissors and my paper snip, and I am going to cut my ribbon to length. And I'm going to cut here, and then I'm going to cut back towards the center so that I got a clean edge that won't show. And I can lay this here so that I can see how far I want to go. Basically, I want to get this third piece of ribbon and cut it where it joins, and then also cut towards the center on that top piece. At that point, I can take my adhesive and simply run a line along the top and place my sentiment down. And as you can see, if I cut that correctly, it'll cover that top edge. So I'm going to let that dry. Okay, to create this little spool focal point, I'm going to add some multi-purpose adhesive onto the back, and I'm going to take the piece of Designer Series paper that I punched out with the Starburst punch, and I am going to lay that towards the center, and then I'm going to flip that over, and I am going to add some Stampin' Dimensionals onto the back to pop that up. And of course you can add some minis here if you'd like to. I'm going to bring back in my card front here that I'm working on, and at this point I am ready to add it, if you'd like to the base that we made in part 1. Make sure your wiper is on the correct side. And I've attached that. So now I'm ready to put the focal point on. I've removed the Stampin' Dimensional backings, and I'm going to place that kind of kittywampus on the front there. And then I'm going to add my Follow My Art. And I'm simply going to add a couple of dimensionals onto this strip and place that where I would like it. I'm going to do that down here at the bottom. And now I'm ready to add these cute little sequins. These happen to be the iridescent sequins, and I am simply going to scatter some around the card. So I'm going to simply squeeze and touch. Multi-purpose adhesive comes out fairly quickly, so you want to move fairly quickly and not allow it or squeeze too hard, making too much come out. I'm going to pour a few of these into my cap so that they're easier to grab, and then I'm going to simply grab them with my Take a Pick tool and scatter them on my card front. And of course you need to be careful so that you're not getting too much adhesive on there so that it oozes out and makes a mess. And you can pick up the different colors. Let me move this so that the adhesive is on the other side. Oops. Don't you love the Take a Pick tool? It's just absolutely fantastic for projects like this. And one more, I'm going to use a green one over here. There we go. And I'm going to allow those to dry while I work on the swiper. So for this I'm taking a 1.5 by 1.5 inch piece of cardstock here, a piece of Designer Series paper, and I am attaching that to the cardstock layer. And then for my swiper, I am simply going to adhere this, and you can use dimensionals. I forgot to do that, so I'm just going to use my multi-purpose adhesive and lay that down on the top. But it's fun if you do some dimensionals behind the little ink bottle and the button. Okay, we're going to tuck that in carefully. Okay, you love the card, but you don't know where to sign it, right? So we're going to flip this over, and we are going to put a panel onto the back. I've taken this quarter sheet of Whisper White. This measures 5 1/4 by 4, and I've stamped this cute little paper clip that comes with the set in Pacific Point. And I am simply going to adhere this panel to the back so that I have a place to sign. And one of my downline gave me this great little tip. She never attaches these panels until she's ready to send the card. She'll stamp them and have them ready, but it's much easier to sign something that doesn't have all these moving parts. So let me show you the original again. If you'd like any of these products, feel free to stop by my online store. You can get there from my blog, Stamp with Jini. Thanks for joining me.